Scott King. May you be pleased with her and may you continue to bless the King family. But at the Mason Temple Church of God in Christ headquarters in Memphis, Tennessee, on April the 3rd, 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King gave a lecture entitled, I've Been to the Mountaintop. And he said, I've seen the promised land. A year later now, he's still evolving in his concept of the word. Now, earlier, when the Negro anthem was being displayed, as it's called, there was a picture of Minister Malcolm X, of Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Many have said historically that they had a meeting. We have to correct that. They did not have a meeting. They met in an airport, and it was Malcolm X's photographer who took the picture. But there was never a meeting between Malcolm X and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And let me say this to you about Malcolm X. First, they called him a nationalist. Then he said he was a Muslim leader and preacher. Then when he died, years later now, Malcolm X is a civil rights leader. Go back and study his lectures. He says rather than fight for civil rights, he says we need to fight for human rights. Isn't this something when you are gone and in the grave, how those who write history can rewrite your history? Now there's the American flag in the X. We have nothing against the American flag or sovereign nation, but we know what we suffered under this flag, like others have suffered under other flags around the world. So in his absence now, his death, Malcolm X now is no longer a Muslim leader as he lived and died. He now is a civil rights leader to make him more palatable to the rest of the world. But I stand here as a Muslim teacher, representing a Muslim leader, and we are unashamed of what we represent, and we are the best thing for you if you understand that. In 1967, there was a meeting for 1 hour between the leader of the Nation of Islam, the eternal leader of the Nation of Islam, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, and Malcolm X. This meeting is recorded in picture form. You can get it in any periodicals about Dr. King. It's there. The Nation of Islam has it in its archives. They met for 1 hour. After that meeting, this speech took place. Not right after, but at this time, the next year, Dr. King gives this speech, I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land. Study it. We're going to speak from a few things about it relative to the African-American male today. But after that meeting, the government of the United States of America approached Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and said, tell us the contents of the meeting with you and Elijah Muhammad. He says, I will keep that to myself. He said, you tell us, or either we will expose your extracurricular activities with white women to your wife, your family, and the world. And it is recorded that Reverend Dr. King said, do what you have to do, and I will do what I have to do. He never talked of that meeting with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, but what came out of that meeting was public known. But you won't know about it because the spin doctors of history don't keep it in the public. That the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad agreed that they would join forces together on the Poor People's March, or the March for the Sanitation Workers that was due to take place on April 4th, 1968. Now, how many of you knew that? Most don't know that. That's hidden from history. Would make you think that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. never got together with one another. There were differences, yes, but they sat down, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is seen posing, talking to Reverend Dr. King, and you see him poised, listening to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And no matter what everyone else said about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and since Reverend Dr. King at that time and now represents the symbol of the civil rights movement, the symbol of black and white coming together, he saw something in Elijah Muhammad that others did not want him to see. And so the so-called integrationists and the so-called separatists now were going to sit down together on the Poor People's march, because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's work had always been dedicated to the poor of our people. That's the work of Jesus. He said, I have been anointed to preach the gospel to the poor. Today, the poor have no voice. They have no voice among Republicans. They have no voice among blue dog Democrats. And Democrats who make a promise but do not fulfill it. This is a country for the rich, beset by the poor, faking and feigning that there's a middle class, but the middle class has one foot on dry land, another foot on a banana peel, and they're about to slip off that banana peel and realize that they're really poor. But poor in money does not mean poor in spirit. Now, listen to the words of Dr. King in this speech. They don't talk about these words. Self-sufficiency. Dr. King says, we need all of you. Talking to the ministers now. So I'm talking to the black male, the African-American male who's in ministry. We need all of you. And you know what's beautiful to me is to see all of these ministers of the gospel. It's a marvelous picture. Who is it that is supposed to articulate the longings and aspirations of the people more than the preacher? And I say today, many black preachers today, Professor Daniel, do not articulate the aspirations of the people. Many preachers today articulate to get tithes and offerings. Many black preachers today articulate a prosperity gospel rather than the longing and aspirations and the suffering and the injustices of the people. But I submit to you, conditions are going to get worse, increasingly worse. And either we're going to represent the people or the people are going to pull down those who do not speak truly for them. Occupy Wall Street, think about it. Minister Farrakhan said at one time, I was a voice crying in the wilderness by myself. Now look here now, we have Occupy Wall Street. Think about it. All right. Dr. King says, look at his words to the preachers. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me. He's anointed me to deal with the problems of the poor. That's what black preachers should be dealing with. He says, I'm always happy to see a relevant ministry. Relevant ministry. Then Dr. King says, it's all right to talk about long white robes over yonder in all of its symbolism. But ultimately, people want some suits and dresses and shoes to wear down here. It's all right to talk about streets flowing with milk and honey, but God has commanded us to be concerned about the slums down here and his children who can't eat 3 square meals a day. It's all right to talk about the New Jerusalem, but one day God's preacher must talk about the new New York, new Atlanta, new Philadelphia, new Los Angeles, new Memphis, Tennessee. This is what we have to do. Now you think about Occupy Wall Street. Not the fringe group, but the part of the group that represents sincere aspirations of the people and the poor. They say the 1% against the 99%. Dr. King goes on to say, now the other thing that we will have to do is this. Listen carefully now. Everyone loved Dr. King as long as he was marching. Everyone loved him back then as long as he allowed us to be hosed down and we didn't fight back. Everyone loved Dr. King sitting in and shutting in. They loved it when he was in jail. But now when he began to talk about economic power, now he became very dangerous to America. Because brothers and sisters, black man and woman, we have been that which this country has built its wealth upon us. The transatlantic slave trade was done, perpetrated because of wealth. Cotton was wealth. Corporations have built themselves based upon that slave trade. And now today, while we're not on a plantation, basketball players, sports stars, even singers are the new sharecroppers of today. Isn't it something how entertainers, when they die, they say they die broke? All of this money that they made, but now when they go to their grave, they have no money all of a sudden. But their producers have the money, their handlers have the money, they live in fine homes and have sent their children to beautiful places. and say that the black man and woman have made progress today in America because of a few 1% or 2% of us. But when you're building a pyramid, you're not as interested in what's at the top as you are what's at the base of the pyramid that supports the middle and the top. So you can't use Oprah Winfrey and Jay-Z and P. Diddy and LeBron James and Kobe Bryant and other titular heads whom you see that have wealth in America, but look at their lives. Look at the lives of these sports stars. Look at the lives of these entertainers. Look at the lives of these actors and actresses. Many of them have broken families, can't stay together. So they have money, they have wealth, they moved in other places, but the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that no one leader can rise above the condition of his people. So no one sports star, entertainer, hip-hop rapper, R&B singer can rise above the condition of your people. And just because we produce a foundation for some young people, but what about the young adolescents? What about the young collegiate minds? We're sitting right here in this university, and the fees to go to the universities go up and up. And it seems as though less services are given, but more fees to go to school in the richest nation on the earth. And if we stop with the unnecessary wars, then our American education can be free for the American people. How can you say we're a free nation, but won't give free education? What are we paying for at the end of the day? Dr. King says, now the other thing we have to do is this: always anchor our external direct action with the power of economic withdrawal. Now we are poor people, individually. We are poor when you compare us with white society in America. We are poor. This is 1968. Never stop and forget that collectively. That means all of us together. Collectively, we are richer than all the nations in the world, with the exception of 9. Did you ever think about that? After you leave the United States, Soviet Russia, Great Britain, West Germany, France, and I could name others, the American Negro collectively is richer than most nations of the world. That's still the case today. We have an annual income of more than $30 billion a year, now $1 to $2 trillion, which is more than all of the exports of the United States and more than the national budget of Canada. Did you know that? That's power right there if we know how to pool it. Look at the language, pooling. That was the language of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He said, get together and pool your resources. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad always talked about the total aggregate of what the black man and woman has in America. And if we leveraged it, we could become a self-respecting people among other civilized nations. He always taught us we were a nation inside of another nation. Now look at Dr. King's words. He says, we don't have to argue with anybody. We don't have to curse and go around acting bad with our words. We don't need any bricks and bottles. We don't need any Molotov cocktails. We just need to go around to these stores and these massive industries in our country and say, God sent us here to say to you that you're not treating his children right. And we've come here to ask you to make the first item on your agenda fair treatment, where God's children are concerned. Now, if you are not prepared to do that, we do have an agenda that we must follow. And our agenda calls for withdrawing economic support from you. And so, as a result of this, we are asking you tonight to go out and tell your neighbors not to buy Coca-Cola in Memphis. Go by and tell them not to buy C-Test milk. Tell them not to buy, what is that other bread? Wonder Bread. And what is that other bread company, Jesse? Tell them not to buy Hart's bread. As Jesse Jackson has said, up to now, only the garbage men have been feeling pain. Now we must kind of redistribute the pain. We are choosing these companies because they haven't been fair in their bringing policies. And we are choosing them because they can begin the process of saying that they're going to support the needs and the rights of these men who are on strike. And they can move on and they can move on downtown, and tell Mayor Leo to do what is right. Listen to these words. But not only that, we've got to strengthen black institutions. So Dr. King talks about boycotting, the power of holding back your dollar from that which does not support you. But look at what he tells us. So how do you see the African American man today? He sees them in these words. We've got to strengthen black institutions. I call upon you to take your money out of the banks downtown and deposit your money in Tri-State Bank. We want a bank-in movement in Memphis. Go by the Savings and Loan Association. I'm not asking you something that we don't do ourselves at SLC. Judge Hooks and others will tell you that we have an account here in the Savings and Loan Association from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. We are telling you to follow what we are doing. Put your money there. You have 6 or 7 black insurance companies here in the city of Memphis. Take out your insurance there. We want to have an insurance in. Then Dr. King says, now these are some practical things that we can do. We begin the process of building a greater economic base. And at the same time, we're putting pressure where it really hurts. I ask you to follow through here. Then he says, now let me say, as I move to my conclusion, we've got to give ourselves to this struggle until the end. Nothing would be more tragic than to stop at this point in Memphis. We've got to see it through. And when we have our march, we need to be there. If it means leaving work, if it means leaving school, be there. Be concerned about your brother. You may not be on strike, but either we go up together or we go down together. Economic self-sufficiency was what Dr. King left as a final message to America as a nation and to black people. Economic self-sufficiency, the core of the work of the Nation of Islam. Economic self-sufficiency. We don't want to have to beg anyone for anything. We believe that with hundreds of millions of acres of farmland, we can grow food for ourselves. We can develop manufacturing for ourselves. Many of us are already on this track already. But Dr. King wanted this for us as a nation. Then Dr. King says, let us rise up tonight with a great readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. Let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation. These were the words of Dr. King. My brothers and sisters, these words are not talked about. All we hear is, I have a dream. And then you see every year on the anniversary of his birth, one corporation after another advertising to the American people in the name of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. What would he think of the African American man today? He would be upset that we have not cashed in the check marked insufficient funds. He would be upset that we have not built black insurance companies when he told us to go and support black insurance companies, should support black economic progress. We have our brothers and sisters who come from the Caribbean. They are us. And they seem to get out a lot further, but the indigenous black man and woman, we seem to be satisfied with going to the Chinese man's restaurant rather than your own restaurant. We seem to be satisfied going to the Italian man and getting his pizza rather than making your own pizza. We seem to be satisfied going everywhere else except for ourselves, then begging others for a job when we can get together, pool our resources, and make a job for ourselves like other self-respecting nations and ethnicities do. We don't need to ask anyone for anything. This is what he would think of the African American male today. We have to go to the essence of his teachings and not the sound bites that are no longer relevant to the time in which we live. Now, I'll leave you with this. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is a critical voice in a critical time in our nation. We cannot continue to keep going back to leaders that we have put below the earth. We have to deal with their principles that they left, but we have to deal with all of their principles if we are to solve the problem between the black and the white here in America. If we're to solve the problem between the Hispanic and the Arab here in America. If we're to solve the problem between the Asian and the Pacific Islander here in America. we have to deal with real solutions to real problems. We never